Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal exciting events in the next 2 weeks from July 28 to August 8, 2025. First, as the final days of July gave way to August, the humid air in Port Charles seemed to thicken with unease. Jocelyn had long believed her life was beginning to normalize, even amid the emotional wreckage left behind by her past with Dex and the recent fractures in her relationship with Carly. But now, under the increasingly watchful and commanding presence of Brennan, her reality began to shift. No longer was he the ambiguous authority figure who lingered in the shadows of the WSB, now he was front and center, issuing directives under the guise of mentorship. What Jocelyn once considered a quest for independence had become a psychological maze, each decision manipulated, each step monitored. Brennan's influence wasn't simply strategic. It was surgical, carving away her freedom piece by piece, replacing it with obligation disguised as purpose. Her instincts screamed that she was a pawn in a far more dangerous game than she understood, but the deeper she followed his orders, the harder it became to turn back without consequence. Meanwhile, Carly, ever the protector, grew increasingly concerned as Jason continued down a path shrouded in secrecy and obsession. Rumors began circulating. Unverified, but chilling in their possibility, that Jason was considering exhuming Britt's grave. For Carly, the implications were horrifying. Not only would it mean disturbing the final resting place of someone she had grown to care about, but it also meant acknowledging that Jason had become consumed by a delusion, or worse, a conspiracy. Carly feared that his belief Britt might still be alive was not rooted in logic but in guilt and grief. What haunted her more was the possibility that Jason was right. Because if Britt had faked her death, it would mean a betrayal far deeper than death itself. It would mean she had orchestrated an escape from a life that many had fought to preserve, possibly with Brennan's help. And Jason, tormented by half-truths and broken loyalties, might be the only one still chasing a reality everyone else had accepted as buried. But Jason wasn't acting on emotion alone. His moves, while obsessive, followed a clear pattern. He had already begun visiting those closest to Britt, starting with Liesel. Their meeting was not warm, nor was it expected. Jason's interrogation of her wasn't violent, but it carried the weight of a man on the brink. He needed answers, and he knew that Liesel, no matter how loyal she claimed to be to the memory of her daughter, had once been capable of falsifying medical records, concealing identities, and faking entire treatment plans. If Britt had needed to disappear, Liesel would have had both the motive and the means to help her. Yet Liesel, worn and weary from her own grief, provided nothing concrete. Her silence only fueled Jason's suspicions. If she wasn't hiding something, she was deliberately refusing to confirm a truth Jason already believed, that Britt had not died, at least not in the way the world had been told. With Liesel offering no path forward, Jason turned to someone more grounded, Elizabeth. Their past made the conversation easier to initiate but not easier to bear. He asked her, carefully and deliberately, to use her connections within the hospital to pull confidential data, records not easily accessible, and certainly not meant for eyes like his. Elizabeth, despite her inner turmoil, agreed. Whether it was loyalty, guilt, or the lingering bond between them, she couldn't walk away from him. Days later, she returned with fragmented but disturbing data. Gaps in time stamps, missing autopsy summaries, inconsistencies in discharge documentation surrounding Britt's last known hospitalization. Nothing conclusive, but enough to suggest someone had rewritten Britt's final chapter. Jason clung to the anomalies like lifelines, knowing that in a world where the dead could be made to disappear, paperwork meant little. He became more convinced than ever that Britt's death had been staged. And that the truth was hidden in plain sight, shielded by those who benefited from her absence. As if on cue, a clue emerged from an unlikely place, the private security logs of Port Charles Airport. A seemingly abandoned bag, discovered during a routine sweep, contained a single medical ring engraved with a surgical ID known only to select WSB operatives and affiliated doctors. The ring bore Britt's credentials, and it hadn't been logged in any system. For Jason, it was more than a breadcrumb. It was proof of movement, of presence, of intention. The ring hadn't been dropped by accident. It had been planted or left behind with precision. Jason began building a timeline, cross-referencing surveillance data, interviewing personnel under assumed identities, and tracking security shifts. Each lead pulled him deeper, not only into the mystery of Britt's disappearance but into a far-reaching conspiracy involving manipulated identities, experimental medicine, and the covert resurrection of individuals presumed dead. The question wasn't just whether Britt was alive, it was who had helped her vanish, and why Brennan was suddenly so invested in mentoring Jocelyn. Second, Drew had always believed that love, once pledged at the altar, could heal even the most grievous of wounds. But as the wedding day unfolded beneath the heavy summer sky of Port Charles, he began to sense a shift, a quiet, foreboding change in Willow's demeanor that suggested her heart might no longer be where he left it. Her appearance in the chapel, radiant yet subdued, was not the reassurance he had hoped for but rather the beginning of a slow unraveling. Willow had shown up, yes, but something in her eyes betrayed a hesitation too deep to ignore. The vows she was expected to deliver were no longer a certainty, they had become a burden she wasn't sure she could carry. For Drew, the ceremony that had been intended as the culmination of their love now loomed as a moment of reckoning, and the possibility that he might be left standing alone in front of everyone, abandoned at the very altar where he had hoped to seal their bond, became more real with each passing second. What Willow carried into that chapel was far more complicated than cold feet or last-minute doubts. In the days leading up to the wedding, she had been forced to confront a truth that shattered the foundation of her relationship with Drew, his past with Nina and the layers of deception that came with it. Though she tried to suppress her emotional chaos for the sake of appearances, the weight of betrayal remained heavy on her soul. That burden only grew when she realized she could no longer ignore her need to rediscover herself outside of Drew's influence. Rumors soon spread that Elizabeth would be hosting a visitor, and speculation rose that the visitor might in fact be Willow herself. The idea wasn't far-fetched. If Willow needed refuge, distance, and time, who better to provide it than Liz, someone who understood the complexity of grief, love, and healing. This potential move would mark not only a physical relocation but a symbolic break from a future she no longer trusted. As the days following the disrupted ceremony unfolded, the emotional consequences rippled through the Corinthos family as well. Michael, already stretched thin by his conflicting loyalties to Willow, Drew, and his own parents, suddenly found himself faced with a heartbreaking choice. Willow, torn between the role of a mother and the anguish of failed love, requested a meeting. Private and uninterrupted, with the children. She needed to explain, to be heard, and perhaps most of all, to see in their eyes whether her decision to walk away from Drew had cost her more than just a broken engagement. Michael, uncertain of what was best for the children, wrestled with the decision. Did he allow her access, risking confusion and emotional upheaval, or did he protect them from the turbulence that now surrounded Willow like a storm cloud? There were no easy answers, only the pain of realizing that even good intentions couldn't prevent a family from fracturing in the wake of betrayal and disappointment. Drew, on the other hand, was forced to wake up, not gradually, but violently, to the reality that his love story had never truly belonged to him. It had been shaped by external forces, marred by lies, and strained by expectations he could never fulfill. For too long, he had clung to the illusion that commitment alone would be enough to hold Willow's heart, failing to see how deeply the wounds between them had festered. Her decision not to go through with the wedding wasn't a betrayal, it was an act of liberation. And Drew, stripped of his role as partner, as protector, was left to examine the pieces of a dream he had built on foundations that could never support it. The ceremony had become a graveyard of promises, and Drew now stood among the ruins, not angry, but hollowed out, searching for where he had gone wrong. In the end, it was not the absence of love that doomed them, but the inability to confront truths buried under years of denial and unresolved pain. Willow's departure, while devastating, was also necessary, for her, for the children, and eventually for Drew. The days ahead would be marked by introspection, healing, and the slow acceptance that sometimes, letting go was the only way to survive. As Elizabeth opened her door to Willow and Michael hesitated at the crossroads of compassion and responsibility, the delicate balance of Port Charles teetered on the edge of change. And as Drew stared at the empty space beside him where a bride was meant to stand, he finally realized that some awakenings come not with gentle understanding. Third, in the coming days in Port Charles, as Drew's wedding fiasco begins to echo through the corridors of General Hospital and the private estates of the Quartermain family, Tracy and Cody find themselves exchanging more than just knowing glances. While others mourn Drew's public humiliation and Willow's torn heart, Tracy sees the collapse of the wedding as poetic justice. She had never been fully invested in Drew's relationship with Willow, viewing it as a distraction wrapped in idealism. For Cody, who has grown increasingly skeptical of Drew's motives and public persona, the failed union offers both amusement and vindication. The two of them, unlikely allies bound by cynicism and strategic intuition, may find themselves indulging in quiet celebration, treating Drew's downfall not as a tragedy, but as a long-overdue reckoning. Their satisfaction isn't rooted in cruelty, but in a belief that false narratives must eventually collapse under the weight of truth. And for Drew, that collapse came with a deserted altar and a fractured image. Meanwhile, Willow stands at a new crossroads, no longer the naive bride waiting to step into a carefully crafted life but a woman awakened by disillusionment. In the aftermath of the broken ceremony, she begins to reflect not only on what went wrong, but on who she wants to become. With emotions still raw and the sting of betrayal fresh, Willow makes a quiet promise to herself. One that marks a turning point in her evolution. Whether this vow is a personal declaration of independence or a pledge to protect her children from future emotional instability, it becomes a foundational moment for her. She may even direct a promise toward Michael, especially if he remains uncertain about allowing her to reconnect with their children. On the other hand, her anger toward Drew may manifest in a desire for justice, or at least resolution. The pain he caused. Whether through omission, manipulation, or simply failing to protect her heart, ignites a quiet fire within Willow that demands something more than passive closure. There is a profound possibility that Willow's promise will not be one of vengeance, but rather one of radical self-transformation. After enduring the emotional roller coaster of illness, motherhood, and now a failed engagement, she begins to realize just how much of her life has been defined by the men around her. Drew, Michael, even the ghosts of past lovers have all shaped her path in ways she no longer finds acceptable. This newfound clarity may lead her to reclaim her autonomy in ways she never has before, perhaps by moving out of the Corinthos orbit entirely, seeking employment independent of family ties, or exploring support systems that reinforce her sense of self rather than drain it. In this light, her rejection of Drew becomes more than a romantic decision, it becomes a declaration of freedom. A line is drawn, not just between her and Drew, but between her past and the woman she's about to become. On the other side of the emotional storm, Nina finds herself in an unexpected moment of grace. Curtis, despite his own entanglements and recent betrayals, extends an apology that Nina neither demanded nor expected. The gesture is simple, yet deeply human, an acknowledgement that she has been used as a pawn in others' agendas too often. Portia, who has had her own experience with fractured trust, offers comfort, reminding Nina that redemption doesn't always come in grand gestures, but in quiet moments of empathy. Though the world may see Nina as a complicated antagonist, there are pieces of her that still ache for peace. And yet, even as forgiveness begins to take shape, Nina's mind spins in darker directions. She remains wounded by Willow's hostility and Drew's hypocrisy. Their cruelty, or what she perceives as such, has carved a permanent space in her heart, and it is that pain that begins to whisper possibilities for action. As emotions simmer beneath the surface, Nina prepares to take a step that could either be a quiet investigation or a calculated act of revenge. Whether she is checking in on Willow out of concern or laying the groundwork for retaliation against Drew, her next move will not be casual. She's learned that direct confrontation often leads to more damage than resolution, so this time, she opts for subtlety. Perhaps she manipulates a hospital file, perhaps she initiates contact with someone from Drew's past, or perhaps she even begins planting seeds of doubt around his integrity in professional circles. Whatever she chooses, it will be deliberate. Nina is no longer a victim in this narrative, she is becoming its architect. In the shadows of betrayal and broken promises, she finds not sorrow, but strategy. And as Port Charles turns the page on another chapter of love lost and truth exposed, Nina may very well hold the pen that writes what comes next. Fourth, back in the still tense atmosphere of Carly's home, she found herself unable to ignore the growing sense of unease surrounding her daughter's involvement with Vaughn. Though Jocelyn seemed confident on the surface, Carly detected a carefully managed performance, something too polished to be entirely real. Anna's recent concerns about Vaughn only deepened Carly's suspicions, especially as whispers circulated that Brennan had handpicked Vaughn with a very specific intention in mind. The idea that Jocelyn and Vaughn were being groomed into becoming a power couple sent chills down Carly's spine. Despite Jocelyn's best efforts to appear affectionate and united in front of her mother, Carly sensed an artificiality that was impossible to dismiss. Jocelyn, clearly aware of Brennan's expectations, played her role with uncomfortable precision, amplifying romantic gestures and emphasizing emotional closeness, as if trying to convince Carly of something she wasn't entirely sure of herself. The manipulation from Brennan wasn't just political or strategic. It was personal, threading its way into Carly's home, her family, and most heartbreakingly, her daughter's identity. Meanwhile, far from the domestic performance playing out under Carly's roof, Emma Scorpio Drake was orchestrating something far more daring. In a moment of quiet intensity, she confided in Gio, revealing troubling details she had uncovered, possibly from whispered conversations or shadowy files, that led them to target Professor Hank Dalton's mysterious laboratory. Emma, driven by a relentless curiosity and perhaps a lingering connection to her parents' legacy of espionage and justice, knew something was being concealed within those sterile walls. Gio, equally determined and intrigued, agreed to help her infiltrate the facility, setting the stage for a high-risk operation fueled by intuition, loyalty, and shared purpose. At the same time, Dante Falconeri pursued a different line of investigation, one centered around his son Rocco, who had become more secretive and emotionally distant. Suspecting that Rocco's recent interest in Britt and contact with Albrecht signaled something deeper, Dante questioned Danny Morgan, probing for any hints about Rocco's movements or mindset. What he uncovered pointed to a larger web of influence. One in which even the youngest in Port Charles were being pulled toward shadows that threatened to engulf them all. Finally, during the week of August 4th to August 8th, the emotional undercurrents in Port Charles will take a compelling turn as Rocco continues to form a deeper connection with Liesl Albrecht, despite fierce resistance from both of his parents, Dante and Lulu. Their concern is valid. Albrecht has long walked the thin line between redemption and darkness. But Rocco's fascination with her seems immune to parental intervention. What began as simple curiosity has evolved into a bond rooted in shared grief and an unspoken desire for belonging. Rocco, still trying to define his identity and place in the world, finds a strange sense of stability in Albrecht's company, particularly as she subtly alludes to the possibility that Britt may still be alive. If Albrecht slips, even just slightly, and shares details about Jason's quiet mission to uncover Britt's fate, it could ignite a spark in Rocco's heart, one filled with hope and a longing to meet the woman he feels inexplicably drawn to. This emotional thread could become a lifeline for him, a reason to rebel against the careful boundaries his parents try to enforce. At the same time, Jason's relentless pursuit for the truth about Britt inches forward. His belief that she faked her death continues to gain traction, and as the pieces come together, it appears likely that Damien Spinelli, armed with his technological prowess and unwavering loyalty, may soon become Jason's key to locating Britt in a faraway place like Croatia. If that confrontation unfolds, it won't just be a reunion, it will be an emotional collision between a past that refuses to die and a present built on half-truths and suppressed emotions. While this emotional storm brews, danger escalates on another front. Jens Sidwell and Marco Rios, two adversaries united by ambition and ruthless intent, begin executing a coordinated plan to eliminate Sonny Corinthos once and for all. Their method will be calculated, likely involving manipulation of Sunny's inner circle and strategic timing rather than a direct assault. But anyone who knows Sunny understands that surrender is never an option. The legacy he's built, forged through years of blood, betrayal, and painful survival, won't be dismantled easily. As Sidwell's vendetta intensifies, so does Sunny's resolve, setting the stage for a violent clash that promises to upend the power structure of Port Charles. The feud between Sunny and Sidwell is far from over. If anything, it's only beginning to erupt in full force. In the background, alliances shift, secrets brew, and every move is met with shadowed retaliation. The next 2 weeks on General Hospital promise an avalanche of confrontations, revelations, and pulse-pounding drama. As the mystery around Britt's disappearance tightens and Sunny's enemies draw closer, Port Charles teeters on the edge of upheaval, and those watching